Hi there, my name's Ischa Ropert and welcome to The Higher Life, where I take concepts that are considered spiritual, esoteric, new age and psychological and unpack how you can apply the wisdom of these to start living in a truly empowered way, to enable the highest potential of humanity to flow through into your personal life. And I'm really excited about today's episode because in fact it will be the last one in this series, The Higher Life. I've been posting these videos for around 4 years now, and it's really mirrored my own trajectory, my own evolution, where initially I was really seeking to understand how can all these teachings that have really stood the test of time, these ideas that we have shared amongst us, such as compassion, forgiveness, God, tolerance, healing, what do these concepts really mean? What have they tried to encapsulate that really wants to bring forward a wisdom or an insight or an intelligence that we can cultivate within ourselves as a human being to really serve in the collective unfolding that's happening out there in humanity? And throughout these series, I've come to discern the difference between being a single human being and our personal power, and how this feeds into what could be called this higher relationship system known as humanity. We are a collective. We are a living organism that is relational in nature. It has its own intelligence, and every single human being is a unique part of this whole functioning system. It's such a wonderful way to come to understand what it means to be a human being and how humanity is constantly evolving into more profound and matured states of awareness. And within your own life, you can actually become conscious, awake, and alert enough that you can be fully conscious while this transformation is happening through you, or evolution. And it can happen in your very mundane, ordinary daily life, which has been a primary focus of the work here at The Higher Life. What I wanted to do is upskill people, create a glossary that would fill a gap in education that I know I didn't receive on what it means to be a human being. Who am I? Why do I see myself the way that I do? Why do I experience so much despair, frustration, and disappointment in the culturally curated reality that I participate in? These have been big inquiries in my life. What am I really here for? And how does life really work? And throughout the last sort of 8 years, I brought all of this research, intelligence, insight into play through what I call the Higher Life Academy. And these are actual courses or masterclasses that lead people through this process of personal transformation so they can become really empowered beings. Now, I am by no means alone in focusing on this really great change that's happening in humanity. The great change, the unbecoming of the ego self, one could say, has been really researched and debated and explored and investigated, for centuries now. It's been a primary concern of philosophy. It's evolved into psychology. You can see this momentum taking place out in the collective, in humanity, which is asking us to face ourselves and to start to understand why we think who we are is who we are. It's very psychological, and I love it. So what I've started to realize is that this work that I'm doing at The Higher Life, it's been all about creating a toolkit, it's a glossary, it's filling a gap in education so I can start to understand, yes, this is what it means to be truly human. These capabilities that I have within myself for curiosity, for playfulness, for compassion, forgiveness, they're a shared capacity that I have with every other human being, and that's what makes us part of this larger system known as humanity. What I've also come to understand is many of the ways that I have identified as a self are really false. It's not to say that they haven't been valuable or enriching or enjoyable or difficult. They've been very real. What my name is, my gender, the racial story that I come from. I really live in a middle-class privileged existence, and that is a legacy that I was born into. And I've started to really question, how true is this really? Is this self a fabricated, a curated self that I'm living through and energizing, or is it really my true nature? And what I've come to understand is who we think we are as a single human being has actually been curated through a psychology that we are born into, and it is cultivated and reinforced. We call this the ego self, or the tribally conditioned self. And I'm not referring to a singular tribe. I'm talking about any relationship system that has us identify with who we are because we belong to a particular group, family, or system. And we all know the dangers of this type of tribal mindset in the current day, where we are definitely way more integrated than the first human beings. We're exposed to different versions of ourselves. We are meeting people from other cultures and tribes. And what we come to understand is we have a shared experience, and we have identities that are based on otherness. That is, I am this way and I belong to this group, and you are that way and you belong to that group. And we are outgrowing this very limited notion of self and coming to recognize that it is in fact a deluded self that we are asked to invest into and maintain throughout our lifestyles. So many people like me have been asking the question, if that is not real, what is real? Who is my true self? And the work that I've done at the Higher Life Academy is really about helping bring you into that level of authenticity and clarity. And now what I want to move into is a new series that I'm creating. And it's a new series that's just naturally following an evolution that I am on and the whole of humanity is on, where we're entering into a more conscious awareness of the great change, this evolution in the human psychology that is currently underway and that is actually moving through us as a physical, energetic transformation. We are becoming a fundamentally transformed being. It is really exciting stuff. And it has been coined the Great Change. Now, where I heard about this was through Richard Rudd's work at the Gene Keys and Human Design. And they've given a kind of time frame for that. I think it's 1987 to 2027. But what I want to explore here is pragmatically, practically, if we're talking about this in the everyday experience of being a human being in middle-class culture like myself, what is the great change? We can be pretty certain that there's the great chaos out there at the moment. I think if you ask anyone, they would say, yeah, I get that. There is chaos, and it's a grand chaos. It's not just chaos on a small scale. It just feels like everything is breaking down and we have no idea what will emerge, and how are we going to be with that chaos? Because we're growing out of this reactive fear response to uncertainty. We're moving into a more matured, grounded, and spiritually aware response. But not everybody has that clarity. Humanity is moving through a transformation, and it's not actually clear on what's happening to it. There's a lack of context. There's no naming really outside of spiritual communities about what this great change entails. Really practically, what are we talking about? What is changing and what makes it great? And what I think makes it great is it's a whole shift in humanity. It's not just happening in one part of the world or one part of our experience. What it means to be a human being, how we see ourselves as an individual, independent self is actually being transformed. And if we put it really practically, we're going to let go or dissolve out of a tribal mindset where our sense of self is curated by belonging to a particular tribe, and we are moving into what will be unity consciousness, where every single human being is a whole, unique, creative component of a larger relationship system known as humanity. Now, that is actually already what is true. It's just that our psychology, our experience of being human hasn't caught up or hasn't woken up to that underlying truth or awareness. So it's actually going to be a real shift. We're going to feel it through our entire system, and we're going to see it play out and mirrored back to us in this great chaotic unfolding that seems to be happening out there in the world. The series that I want to bring forward is how can we navigate the great change. But what I'm really going to be focusing on is the grand unbecoming. I want to get very practical because I want to talk about what happens to you, to me, on a personal level. What is being asked of us as a single human being who really wants to step up and co-create and support and align with this great change. And what we're talking about is a grand unbecoming. I love that word unbecoming because it was used in old times as to refer to behavior that just wasn't socially acceptable. And what we are moving out of is social constructs, a culturally curated sense of self that was born through the initial tribal mindset and really has just been reinforced and refined. So now we have a culturally curated version of tribes that operate through families, through nations, through communities, through cultures, through identification with any type of grouping of humans that you feel more aligned with than another. So we're really moving out of this. Now, you may say that's really crazy because people are over-identifying. Now we have even more labels, but there's always an extreme before that dies away. So we're going to almost over-identify in that last hurrah before we give up identification altogether. And that's going to create this completely new space for what it means to be a single human being in this larger system known as humanity. And we're going to get very clear on these archetypal energies that make up our personality. We're going to get very skillful at emotionally astute ways of being in the world. We're really moving into a very probably what could be perceived as quite an emotionally turbulent period of humanity, but it's not going to necessarily happen out there. This is inner work. Our forefathers and mothers have been helping us build up to this moment by bringing in all these different levels of awareness and insights and tools that can help us sit with our own inner difficult experience. We're going to face our fears, face the emptiness that we have spent so long avoiding. We're going to do the real alchemic work to heal our ancestral traumas. That's happening now as I am speaking to you through this lesson. That's happening out there. People are doing this work, and it's really going to transmutate the way that we experience ourselves in relation to other people. The way that we experience ourselves in relation to our ancestors and to our future. It's going to be a really exciting time to be human, and if you can meet the grand or great chaos with this level of clarity, you will not be afraid of it. You will see it for what it is, which is a very necessary part of the breakdown of the old systems, which kept us in this very narrow, limited view of ourselves, over-identified with these tribes that we were born out of or from over centuries of existence. And you may say that's huge to give that up. I love my language, I love my rituals, I love the food that comes from my particular tribal legacy. You can still enjoy and appreciate all of those things. It's just a question of whether who you think you are relies on them. You can be who you are and enjoy what you do without thinking it makes you a self. And to get clear on this, if you were to have amnesia and wake up tomorrow, the only way that you would be able to remember that culturally or tribally curated self is if other people told you who you were. The only thing you would be able to know for sure is how you feel, the things that you're able or capable to do, such as express joy, to cry, to feel empathy, to move into states of forgiveness, to have sensory experiences, to feel energetic movements through your body. Those are things that nobody needs to tell you for you to ensure who you are. And these are things that you share or attributes with every other human. So what makes it true is that you can rely on that. But if you wake up with amnesia and there's no one from your tribe to remind you of who you were, you will never get that back because it wasn't real to start with. And we have to face that reality that all these wars we are fighting to uphold a sense of self that is based in tribal tendencies and untruths is really falsehood, and we're killing people for nothing. It really isn't true. Now, it may have been true for people in the past for whatever reason, but we are coming out of that state of ignorance, and we can no longer ignore the fact that these conflicts are really in service of maintaining an old paradigm that we don't really believe in. And it will take a while for the whole of humanity to move into this new level of awareness. But all we actually need is for enough of humanity to move to get that tipping point, where more people are in the new reality than the people who are leaving it behind. Now, this is definitely something that we have experienced before as a species when, most of humanity believed that the world was flat. And if a single human came and said to them, well, that's actually not true, and you're basing your entire reality on a falsehood, they may have been killed, and I'm sure they were. But over time, enough human beings started to be curious and open to this possibility, and people went and explored, and eventually, through that trial and error, that courage and that capacity to move beyond what you think that truth revealed itself, and it fundamentally transformed and transmuted how we viewed ourselves in this current reality. So we are at that level of change, the great change, in which what is becoming evident is that every human being is moving into a state of unbecoming, that ego self, which will then allow you to step into a more true version of self. So if this sounds exciting to you, stay tuned. I'm going to launch the new series in the next few weeks, and I'm really looking forward to having you on board. If you're curious about anything else that I've mentioned in this video, check out Higher Life Academy, or I have been posting to a new podcast called The Pearl Effect, where I do a deep dive into personal transformation, and that can help get you up to speed on what's coming. So until next time, take care and love life.